Mr. Quigg. Welcome.
Search and rescue for the Great Lakes. And we covered the entire Great Lakes for all the major ship happenings. It was November 18th, 1958 at 6 o'clock in the evening. It was my day for duty. And I'm having dinner in the post office cafeteria, which is where the officers' search and rescue office was. And the radio man came back and said, we got a little problem here. We got an SOS. I think we got a sinking in Lake Michigan. So I go back in, and it turned out to be the Carl Bradley 639-foot ore boat from Rogers City, Michigan, that had been witnessed to break up in 40-foot seas in northern Lake Michigan on a very windy night up by the Sioux near Presque Isle. So I got my stuff together and figure out who to call and what ships to send out and what airplanes. Back then we didn't have the communications we have today. I used the Canadian Air Force because it was so far north. The Air Force in Minnesota, ironically. Helicopters where I could find them, and the on-site ship was the Sundew buoy tender out of Charlevoix, Michigan, but it was going to take several hours for it to get up on site. So we didn't know much about the ship at that time. I didn't have the communications and no encyclopedia to go to right away, how many crew and all that sort of information. I just know I had a big search operation underway. It took me about an hour and a half to get everything organized, and I called my boss and I said, Commander, I just thought I'd bring you up to date. We got a little problem up here, and I went through it. And after I explained it, I said, when will you be down? He said, no, it sounds like you're under control. You can handle it. I said to myself, I'm 24 from Indiana. Let's slow down here. So I had the job. TV didn't have remote, so I didn't have to put up with the TV people, but I had plenty of newspaper guys on and the radio, and I called the information officer and said, get down here. And I spent the night trying to figure out where the search should go. They sent out 100 flares that night. They couldn't find anybody. And it wasn't until 8 o'clock the next morning when we got a message from the Sundew that the cook of the Sundew had spotted a raft in the water, and there were 2 people on it, and they rescued them. Ended up being the only 2 survivors out of 35. 33 men lost their lives. Of those, 23 were from Rogers City, Michigan, where the ship was from. So 23 women lost their husbands because they were all married, and 53 children lost their father. I'm kind of remote from it. I've been at sea on the Grand Banks. I knew what it was like to be out there. But on December 1st, Life magazine ran an article with all the pictures, and I will return to this a little later. This picture of this family haunted me for a long time. I really got emotionally involved with the wreck. It's 63 years later. Nothing really happened as far as that's concerned. And I was going to be in Michigan, and I called the Maritime Museum in Rogers City and got in touch with them, and they called me back and said, we'd like for you to speak at the next bell ringing, and they ring the bell for all crew members every year and have ever since they brought the bell up 20-some years ago. So I go up and I'm talking to 200 people in the local theater for the event and telling them my story. And in the middle of the story, I talked about my when I really became emotionally involved, and I held up the picture and showed the audience. When I got done, I walked out, and the director of the museum came up and said, the little girl in the mother's arms is in the audience, and she wants to talk to her. Jo Ellen was her name. She was 3 months old when that happened. She gave me a big hug, and we talked. The emotion in Rogers City is indescribable. Today, all these years later, it still permeates that town of only 2,500 people. They didn't have the mental health assistance back, and there was one of the survivors was Frank Mays, who used to come back, and he finally quit coming back because people would stop him on the street and say, why you? Literally. And people told me that story while I was there. I had 4 men come up to me crying before the bell rang. Hello? They were all in their close to 70 probably. They were young kids when their fathers died. Just an unbelievable experience. Well, I mentioned Frank Mays. one of the survivors. He had died when I was up there. He'd been dead for a couple of years, and he was only 2 years older than I was. And back in 29, with the internet and everything, I had seen Frank's picture on the website for the Lower Maritime Museum. So I Googled him, found him in Dade City, Florida, and I picked up the phone one afternoon, called him, and we chatted. We talked for an hour, and it was fascinating to connect with him, and I'm hearing his live voice, and he's hearing my involvement. And he said, you know, after the hour, he said, this has really been interesting talking to you, but I have a story that will top this. He said, 3 months ago, I was on my way to Walmart with my wife, and we pulled into the parking lot, 20-minute drive, and a car with Michigan plates pulled up beside us. And we got out, and I walked over and said, hi, I'm Frank Mays. And the guy said, are you from Rogers City, Michigan? He said, yes. And he says, I was the cook on the Sundew that spotted you in the water.